I'm going to do something that I don't normally do. I did an article for our newsletter that we do every month on something called the Dark Night of the Soul, and usually I talk about that kind of right after, but it's been a couple of weeks since then. I'm talking about it now. I'm going to kind of riff off of what I wrote for that. So the Dark Night of the Soul, this is something that I heard about the first time in a kind of weird set of circumstances by somebody who I just barely knew, and he was, I want to say, working for Lockheed Martin, and he said, I have like friends who do lots of drugs, but I can't do drugs because I have to have a security clearance for my job as a military contractor. So I wanted to have an experience that was like a dissolution of the ego and the self without using substances. So I went to have a dark night of the soul with this Zen kind of retreat, this Buddhist retreat. And he didn't really give me a lot of the details, but he explained it, and I was like, oh, that sounds very interesting, because I had been meditating for decades at that point, and had not heard of this specific kind of way of describing it before. So I'll kind of get more into the way that it ties in with our own practice, but it is first described by St. John of the Cross, and he was, allegedly, this is while he was imprisoned in the 1500s, and he's describing it as like a purification of the spirit. So when we talk about, letting the ego go or ego death, and purification of the spirit is more of like the Christian way of describing it. There are lots of different concepts in different religions that have the same basic idea, or they're related at least. So today it's more commonly used to describe like a crisis of faith or a particularly difficult time in somebody's life. And crisis of faith is like, I think of myself as a very, devout Christian, let's say, but then I start to have doubts about, what I believe or whatever. And you could have the same thing in our practice. Maybe you've been practicing jiu-jitsu for years and you start to get tapped all the time by other white belts, and you're like, I thought I was so good. That happens to me sometimes. But recently, my crisis of faith has not been so much happening, but a difficult time. I have a baby who's 4 months old, and I didn't talk to a single person who had kids leading up to this event in my life who said, it's going to be so great, you're just going to have a wonderful time, it will be just fun, no problems at all. Everybody was like, you're going to love it so much, and it's probably going to be the hardest thing that you've ever dealt with. And absolutely, my life is, I lead what I would call a charmed existence. I have designed my life to get to do what I love to do every day: martial arts, meditation, teaching, practicing. It is awesome. I generally would get 8 hours at least of sleep every single night, and that has not been happening. So what happens now is, for the first couple of months, I would take the first shift, and I'm sleeping in the same room as my baby, Alora, because they say that this is the best way you can kind of cut the incidence of SIDS in half. And if we are kind of just aware, and I have this weird thing that is switched on with me where I'm like hyper vigilant, and I can hear every tiny movement. She's not crying. She's basically asleep. She sleeps from 7 p.m. until 7 a.m. 12 hours. She just like kind of stirs a little bit, and we like give her some milk while she's still asleep, and then she stops moving again. But she moves enough that it wakes me up like every 10 minutes. So I'm never actually sleeping for the first 3 or 4 hours of the night. And then I would like hand her off to my wife or grandma who's there helping as well. And then I would go to bed, and then I would just lay there trying to sleep. I'm just laying with my eyes closed. For some reason, I just could not go back to sleep. And it has never happened to me before. For the first so many years of my life, I could just sleep anywhere, anytime, so easy. Now, not happening. I'm like always aware that something, my baby's moving, somebody's gonna break into the house, maybe she's like on her face, whatever, so I'm just like awake. So now what we've done is, I get to sleep for the first 4 hours, and at least then I actually sleep for 4 hours, and then I'm just awake for the next 4 hours of the night. So 4 hours from 8, it's not great. That is all to say that things are rough. So I'll spend hours just like laying there on my back with my eyes closed, like just watching my breath. Lately, to fast forward, I have actually been able to sleep. I'm okay. That's why I'm here standing and not just on the ground. But for 2 months or 3 months, it was really rough. And the combination of just the lack of sleep, which I'm absolutely not used to, along with just like sitting there and watching your thoughts, sometimes the thoughts that come up in the situation are not good. So this is one of the worst sources, the biggest sources of unhappiness for people is a lack of sleep, and absolutely for me. So I've had a couple of nights where I do feel like I'm having absolutely a dark night of the soul, where I'm like thinking, how could this possibly be any worse? But also like, am I a bad father? Can I do this? I must also be a terrible teacher. Like my brain is going to all kinds of places that are absolutely not helpful, that it doesn't usually go because I have enough sleep. Yet here I am. I'm just laying there for 4 or 5 hours just having these terrible thoughts. Awful. And I would have the feeling like I'm unraveling. And part of the idea, I wouldn't say, I mean, obviously some people have had much worse experiences than me. I have a friend who swore to me that the first year of after having a kid was the worst year of his entire life. I would say that there are aspects of this that are certainly in line with that. But I would feel myself unraveling to the point where it is kind of like a mix of depression and like that ego death. Like it is, what does any of it even mean? What am I doing here? Am I able to do anything? And I had definitely had feelings of like, I should just give up completely. Not like suicidal, but suicidal adjacent. So I've had, within the last couple of weeks, like a really decent string of good night's sleep. So I will say that I'm way, not completely on the other side of it, but I feel 100 times better. So I'll talk less about my own personal experience. And look, there's a part of this where you're meant to kind of go through the dark night of the soul, have this like ego death, this dissolution of the self, and to kind of come out on the other end having like learned a really great lesson and feeling like you are your faith is stronger, or you have really come to terms with things in your life, or be, like gotten in touch with what is deeper about you. And I would say that I'm still very much on my way with that. I wouldn't say like I had a few terrible nights of sleep and now I'm enlightened. Like I'm a work in progress. Eckhart Tolle describes the dark night of the soul as a collapse of a perceived meaning in life, an eruption into your life of a deep sense of meaninglessness. And that's absolutely kind of the feeling that I got. The experience is similar to depression, can be triggered by an event such as the death of a loved one. Obviously, things like, lots of lost sleep. I did have an experience similar to this. My mom passed a couple of years ago, and we knew it was coming. It wasn't a surprise, and in some ways that made it better, in some ways that made it worse. But I had the experience, which I'm not going to say is good or bad, but it was absolutely an experience of being there and holding her hand while she was passing. And she was on a ventilator for a couple of days, and then she did not want that for herself. And she knew that at this point she was not coming back, so she asked to be taken off. And it was quite traumatic in some ways, and absolutely, I remember that moment, or that hour. She lasted longer than she was supposed to. She's very strong, my mom. And I kind of replay that in my mind, her breathing, which got raspier, and just the whole experience of being there, which I'm so glad that I got to be there, but also it was really a thing to have stuck in my head. And then after that, I had had grandparents die before my mom, but it was the first time where I really felt like connected in a way with my own mortality, where before that I kind of felt invincible, which, like, as a martial artist, sometimes that makes you feel more invincible, and sometimes, like, depending on how your back feels that day, you feel very invincible. But I felt for the first time like, wow, this could all just end like that. And for me, and for now that I have a kid, it's like, oh my God, like what if something happens to me? Sometimes I'm thinking about if something happened to her and just all of the murder that I would do. But like all of this is, it was a very unique and new experience for me. Unique is the nicest way of putting it. Like it's a mostly negative experience having a loved one die, and to really start to have these intrusive thoughts, which I still do get sometimes, about like just dying and death and like the finiteness and also the futility of so much of what we do. It happens. So when I'm good, which is most of the time, if I'm sleeping and meditating, I'm always meditating. It's a question of, am I sleeping? Then I can usually kind of steer this into a more positive direction. It's like, okay, I don't want to just sit here and wallow in thoughts of my own mortality or whatever. I kind of am able to steer it towards, what can I do today? If my time is limited, which I know that it is, what should I get done today? How can I touch somebody in the best possible way? How can I, make the most of the time that I do have? How can I help the dojo? How can I help my family? An important aspect of the dark night of the soul is, as a crisis of faith, is that it's a journey with no clear destination. So if you're having this, and it's never like this. You can understand intellectually, but while you're actually in the dark night, you're not thinking like, oh, I know what this is. This is the dark night of my soul, and I'm heading in this direction. Like, there's no clear destination. You don't know where you're going. You might have a basic idea of, as we talk about with so many things in life, like this too shall pass, but we don't know that it's going to pass into something good or useful. We just know that it's going to pass. There is no clear destination, and this is kind of how faith works. This is kind of how our meditation practice works in search or on the journey towards enlightenment. We don't have a specific time. We don't know what that looks like. I have, over the last couple of years, kind of shied away from thinking of enlightenment as like a state of being at a finite time, like a clear destination. It's more like we're kind of always headed in that direction. Maybe we're a little bit more enlightened today than we were yesterday. And these experiences that we have are what push us in that direction. You might have a really rough meditation. So Kai got to experience this 1 hour meditation that we do for the Green Sash test. For the martial arts class that we have, the higher rank you get, the longer you have to meditate. And it goes up to 3 hours for Black Sash. And some of the meditations can be quite rough. I had a meditation for my Red Sash test for 2 hours that started off so nice. For the first hour, I was just sitting there like on a cloud. I felt like amazing. And then my hip like shifted into that terrible place that your hip goes sometimes, where it feels like it needs to be removed from your body. You've experienced this before. And to just sit there, because you're not allowed to move during this meditation, I spent an hour there thinking like, I'm going to vomit from the pain and fail this test. And I just somehow sat there still. And my Sifu came in and ended it, and he was like, how was your meditation? I was like, this is the worst experience of my life, sir. And I was dead serious up till that point. It was terrible. And sometimes our meditations will be like that with or without physical pain. It will just be like, you'll go somewhere with your mind and it will feel rough. And so this direction that we're heading, we don't know necessarily exactly where we're going, and that's part of it. It's part of the necessary pain and the uncertainty. I don't know, can we see the full moon out tonight? It's out there. You might not be able to see it right now, but pretend that you can see it. So this is the finger pointing to the moon, right? And when people come to class, or they start engaging in philosophy, organized religion, they have a teacher, whatever, that's the finger. And it's very easy and common to get attached to the finger. But remember, the finger is just pointing the way. And, we're pointing to the moon. That is really what we're after. It's a direction that we're going in. A finger pointing to the moon is not clear enough instructions to actually get to the moon. It's like you have to build a rocket and do all this other stuff. But you get it. Bruce Lee said, don't concentrate on the finger and miss all that heavenly glory. So when we focus on, the teaching or the practice, that can sometimes be helpful to just kind of focus and dig into a process and just showing up and doing the work, doing the meditation. But remember that we're heading in a direction that, sure, some people have been to the moon and some people have been enlightened and all that, but we don't really have enough of a direct experience of it when people talk about it to know what we're doing and know where we're going. So you just like see, that's where I'm going, and you try to go there. Any great teacher will hope to be a stepping stone for their students, and it's like, I hope that you are already better at meditating than I am. So I just talked about all this stuff. Wonderful. Joseph Campbell, he describes it like this: the dark night of the soul comes just before revelation, when everything is lost and all seems darkness. Then comes the new life and all that is needed. And some of you have read Joseph Campbell, if you've heard of this idea of the hero's journey, and this is absolutely, it's become like a super standard part of a lot of the movies that come out. But in our practice, we really endeavor to have this kind of attitude, and it's with our internal and our external practice. We think of a challenge as an opportunity rather than a problem. And so the dark night of the soul is like one of the greatest possible examples of this. It's a challenge that is not like the end, right? It is an opportunity, the opportunity to grow, the opportunity to kind of emerge from that a more perfect version of ourselves. And when we think of things in this way, we kind of get unstuck. The feeling of being stuck is like, this is a problem, and I'm stuck because I'm dealing with the problem. But an opportunity, kind of, when we see things that way, we see all the different ways around it. This helps us to be creative, or it helps us to just kind of flow. And when faced with a super difficult time in life, it might not be as simple as it is in class, where you're grappling with somebody in jiu-jitsu and it's like, I need to just kind of relax out of this. It could be like, I need to kind of dive into this and relax into it and just let it wash over me and really face this with radical acceptance. And when we kind of dive into it, it's like when you're entering the ocean and the waves are crashing. You can try to just meet the wave like this, which is painful, or you can kind of dive into the wave and let it crash over you, and that is one of the smoothest waves that you'll get in. Have you guys been to the ocean yet? I don't go in the water anymore, it's too cold. But if you're going to do it, that's what you should do. So we don't necessarily want to avoid the suffering. In the dark night of the soul, you're probably not going to, but even in just the everyday things, the suffering is a part of it, and it is really an invitation. It's an opportunity to kind of become stronger, not hardened like against the world and feeling like everything is against us, but to become stronger when we accept that. If you've experienced a dark night of the soul or anything close to it, just like a super difficult period of time in life, you can appreciate the importance of doing some work to prepare for it. So many people, when met with really difficult times or a super difficult experience, are just crushed. And for some people, like, that's it. Like, give up and I'm just done completely. And for other people, maybe I'm crushed to the point where it's like, it lasts for years, and I really am kind of sucked into a period of depression that's really hard to get out of. And I'm not saying that none of that's going to happen, but the more we can kind of prepare for it, whether it be just understanding the inevitability of it, the longer we are alive, the more chances we have for these difficulties, or doing some actual work to prepare, like meditation, prayer, reading books that are inspirational, talks, all this stuff. Sleep, lots of sleep. I have this silly thing where every time I travel, I get sick. I mean, it's like 95% of the time, and I finally figured it out. I used to think like I was eating improperly, or like I was like around too many germs in the airplane or whatever. It's just sleep. I just don't sleep enough, and it's stress, it's sickness, it is a deep philosophical crisis. Like it is all tied to sleep for me. If I sleep, I'm totally happy. But whatever you can do to kind of lessen the blow, because again, you're not going to completely escape the suffering, but that doesn't mean that you have to invite the full weight of it. Again, that's like taking the wave head on like this. It's like we can still take it while we're still massaging it or kind of flowing with it. And if we're able to do that, then we have kind of some perspective, and I think that'll help us to get the most out of it versus just be knocked over and done. So whatever your helpful disciplines are, and it doesn't have to be meditation, although I am biased in teaching a meditation class. I think this is one of the best things that we can do, but whatever it is that works for you, do it. And then I have a little snippet. I hardly let a Thursday go by without quoting this James Clear. He's the author of Atomic Habits, but he has a really great weekly newsletter. So this one refers to this concept. He says, you can't change your past, but you can reframe it. Find the lesson in it. Find the opportunity in it. Pull the teachable moment out of it and share with others. You can't choose your history, but you can choose the story you tell about it. So on the one hand, it's like you're preparing and doing the most that you can to be able to deal well with these difficult times. But on the other hand, difficult times have happened to us. You know, the death of a loved one or whatever it is. I mean, I doubt years from now I'm really going to be still complaining about a lack of sleep that I had during my child's first few months, but maybe. But the story that we choose to tell about these things is massively empowering for us, or can be massively disempowering for us. So if we tell the story like, I don't know what my wife was thinking getting pregnant, and then she had this baby, and this baby is just always like has it out for me. She's crying every night and like kicking her bassinet and like and that's one way of telling the story. And I get that, because that's the way that I feel sometimes. But the other side of it would be like, you know, of course, focusing on the positive, and like when I switched shifts and now I get the morning shift, of course I haven't been asleep for like 3 hours by the time she wakes up, but she wakes up and she's got this smile on her face that is literally the most beautiful thing that I've seen in my entire life. And I've seen things, but when she smiles first thing in the morning, it's like, it's probably got very little to do with me. She's just happy to be alive. And she had a lot of great sleep, so I totally understand why she feels so great. But focusing on that, but also focusing on like the aspect of growth. And it's like, yes, I had that difficult time, and I had that lack of sleep, and figured out how to deal with it, and all that came out on the other end a little bit stronger. So when we kind of massage the story that we tell ourselves about the past, or about the experiences that we're having right now, we can have a vastly different experience. And the things that are happening to us might be the same things that other people have dealt with, or might be the things that we've dealt with in the past, but we change the story about it, and now it becomes less difficult. It becomes like I can kind of enjoy the difficulty. And I'll tell you that a lot of the tests that we do are brutal. And part of the reason for it is so that you can look back on it. You can look back on that green sash test or that meditation and be like, yes, I did that. This thing that I'm doing right now isn't that bad, because I did that thing which was awful and I survived it. So now I can kind of be okay with it. We don't want to have to seek out like the most grueling experiences, but it will oftentimes kind of give us that perspective. So I'm sure to some of you, the things that I've talked about tonight just don't seem that bad. And I'm sure to some people listening, it's like you're about to just cry for me. But whatever it is that we're experiencing, so much of that comes down to just our attitude towards it and the story that we tell about ourselves. And I can think of no greater tool to be aware of the thoughts that we're having and the stories that we're telling ourselves than meditation. So of course, when we sit to meditate, we're trying to spend a decent amount of time just watching the breath and clearing the mind, and, you know, recognizing the thought and letting it go. And that is absolutely what we want to do. And sometimes you're just going to be there sitting and thinking. And when you recognize the thoughts that keep coming up, those are the ones that very likely throughout your day are coming up, even on a subconscious level. So recognize that and decide, is this something that I want to nurture and kind of keep having, keep reinforcing, or is it something that I want to let go? Is it something that I want to massage and kind of shift my self-talk or the story that I'm telling around it? So it all starts with awareness. Like I say, the first step is knowing you have a problem. And if you're not aware, you don't know. So let's sit comfortably. I'll kind of talk you through a couple of ideas to start our meditation. So I sit, because of my knees and hips, I always sit in Seiza, but sitting cross-legged will work, sitting with your legs straight, whatever you need to do. Just make sure that you do not have your knees sticking up too high above your hips. If you can sit full or half lotus, that is marvelous. I'm so jealous of 3 of you in this class. Hip surgery, absolutely. If I can get it, I'm going to put in a good word for this half lotus doc. Okay. So, knees even with or below the hips, hands upturned. You can have them together or separate. You don't want them sliding too far down because that creates a slouched posture. So your shoulders are rolled back and relaxed, chin parallel to the ground. We normally have the eyes closed, which I prefer, and you can have your eyes open, but you don't want to have too much sensory input. So usually eyes closed or barely open with your eyes raised up to the point between the eyebrows. In some styles of meditation, they'll look down. That can work as well. But remember, we have a tendency to have this association with a raised consciousness when we raise the eyes, and it helps us not fall asleep during our meditation. So it's a physical position of the body. If you're having a difficult time getting your eyes in the right position, you can just visualize that point between your eyebrows, and your eyes will naturally slightly raise up to assume that position. From here, we'll take a couple of deep breaths together. Start with all the breath out, breathing in through the nose. Hold it for a few seconds at the top, and then breathe out. So you're breathing from the belly using the diaphragm. When you're holding at the top, try to just do that with your lungs rather than creating a seal, and then breathe out. Exhale through the nose or the mouth. Try to deepen the breath in, a little slower, a little deeper. Again, hold for a few seconds at the top and out. 2 more deeper breaths. Last one. And finish with a double exhalation. And then just let the breath come in and let the breath go out. So your mind will wander, and as often as you can, gently bring your mind back to the breath, just feeling the sensation of your breath as it enters the belly or as it comes in and out through the nose. When you find a particularly persistent thought, something that keeps coming up, rather than judging yourself for it, which just creates another cycle of thought, you can just label it as thought without judgment. And same thing with the breath. As you're watching the breath, you might feel a short breath or a long breath. Rather than judging the quality of the breath, just be with it. Feel the physical sensation of the breath without judging or painting it with any kind of thought. You can also just watch the thoughts come and go, and try to let go without any kind of attachment. Just sit as still as possible. Continue clearing that mind. Do this for about 15 minutes.